Our mission is to foster a sense of worth, self, and health for those impacted by trauma while looking for inspiration to build a whole and fulfilling life. Hello everyone, welcome to the second episode of the Advent Institute. I am your host, Bebop, and I am really excited to get started on this second episode. If you don't know, this channel is an offshoot of my lifestyle channel, Runic Regal, that I've had for about 4 years, and we discuss mental health topics, particularly healing from trauma. So today we're going to talk about something really important, and that's how to accept a life with trauma. Now, I want to distinguish that this is not going to be about particularly living your healthiest life and finding motivation. This is going to be about the first step of the process, which is acceptance. And as we all know, acceptance is the first part of getting over grief. And I think there is definitely a level of grief associated with accumulating trauma. Nobody wants to accumulate trauma, but that does lead us into our first point, which is realizing you're not alone. Trauma is a very varied experience. We all experience trauma in our life. Trauma is something that is unavoidable. I've even heard some people say that you can experience trauma in the womb. Do I subscribe to that? I don't know necessarily. I don't know the science behind that. But the point is that, to some degree, we all do experience physical traumas, emotional traumas, various kinds of traumas. And so it's important to understand that this is a fact of life, right? This is a fact of life. And if you're listening to this, I'm guessing that you or someone close to you has experienced trauma recently. And we're going to talk today about accepting that. And the first part of accepting it is to understand that is a part of life and that you aren't alone. Everybody has experienced that pain, that uncertainty, that grief of losing somebody or any other various things. Maybe it's an injury, maybe it's chronic trauma from experiencing trauma again and again over a long period of time. The definition of trauma is simply a deeply distressing or disturbing experience or a physical injury. I'm sure psychologically we could break that down even further. And if you look at the definition of psychological trauma, it says it's the damage to the mind that occurs as a result of a distressing event. Trauma is often the result of an overwhelming amount of stress that exceeds one's ability to cope, integrate the emotions involved with that experience. So basically this is like a mental injury, and I am a big advocate at looking at mental health as physical health. If someone were to experience physical trauma, say they broke a bone or something to that effect, we would acknowledge that as an injury. There would be no real ambiguity there, right? We would look at them and go, their arm is broken, they're injured. We don't need to debate or refute that. That's something that happened. But with psychological trauma and psychological injury and psychological illness, we seem to think there's a lot of ambiguity. And that's something I would like to kind of push back against, because I do believe that, we are both psychological and physical creatures, and we have what we would consider physical effects by experiencing psychological trauma, be it crying or a stomach ache or not wanting to eat or trembling or fainting. There is no difference between a psychological response and a physical response. They're the same. Your heart racing, your what goes on in your mind absolutely affects your health. It's a whole encompassing thing, and we need to stop looking at it as an emotional thing that's kind of off in the cloud and something that we're experiencing physiologically in our bodies. So that's part of understanding that you're not alone, that this is something that is going to physically and mentally affect you, not just mentally, but also physically. And so I hope that when you're trying to understand your trauma, just talking about this and how to accept this and how to experience this and understanding that you're not alone in that experience, that will be one of the first steps to helping you accept it, and that you don't have to feel ashamed or stigmatized, because in every life at some point you're going to experience it on a varied some kind of varied level. So It's not something to kind of run from. I think it's much more healthy for us to all learn how to accept that. Going along the lines of ambiguity, I strongly can encourage that if you feel the effects of trauma, that you receive a diagnosis. Potentially, if you think you have post-traumatic stress disorder, borderline personality disorder, bipolar disorder, a generalized anxiety disorder of any kind, I strongly encourage you to get a diagnosis. I do understand that cost can be restrictive and prohibitive, and that the healthcare in this country is lacking. And part of the reason it's especially lacking in mental health is because we do continue to look at it as something, again, ambiguous, subjective. It's really not. But part of the reason I think that we do look at it as something that's so subjective is because we have so much self-diagnosis going on. Just, I have PTSD, I have anxiety disorder, I have agoraphobia, I have OCD, I have, all these terms are so overused. I thought that I had hypochondria, and, slap on the wrist for me, I was saying I have hypochondria. And then I went to therapy, and my therapist was like, I don't think you have hypochondria. You're just suffering from a lot of complex PTSD and grief. And understanding that helped me to understand how to better treat myself and understand myself and understand the angles I needed to take with myself to heal. So by understanding an actual diagnosis, it really helps you understand kind of your action plan going forward. And it also does help to destigmatize mental health when we're not overusing terms that aren't actually applicable to us. If you thought you had cancer, you wouldn't just say, oh, I think I have cancer, and then do nothing about it, right? You wouldn't do that because that would be insane. And I think we need to really understand that people with traumatic injury and mental health diagnoses and actual mental disorders, they're more likely for substance abuse. They're more likely to commit suicide. They're more likely to have physical elements that reflect what is going on with them. And when we overuse those terms without any kind of medical diagnosis, what we're saying is basically like, this is not a severe medical issue. There's a big difference between diagnosing yourself with something maybe minor, like, if I think I might have a food allergy, maybe I'm going to stop having that food, and I can tell, like, hey, my throat swells up, and that kind of thing. But when we're talking about things like post-traumatic stress disorder, borderline personality disorder, anxiety disorders, those are things that can actually prevent people from living their lives at all. And when we overuse those terms, or we accept that we might have them without treating them, I think that's damaging to other people and to yourself. If you genuinely believe that you have a mental health disorder, you have a medical disorder. And I would hope that you wouldn't leave a medical disorder unintended, although I know that in this country, due to the fact that, again, healthcare is so prohibitive, sometimes we do. But it's just something to consider. Consider to get a diagnosis for yourself, not for anybody else, but for yourself, so that you can better understand yourself. If something's really troubling you and giving you a lot of pain, and you have a physical, you have kidney stones and you're in pain, you're going to rush to the doctor and try to figure out what's going on. And so I would highly encourage you to do the same with your mental health. If you believe that there's something going on, please get a diagnosis as the first step. And that kind of ties into my second point, which is to research and to understand your symptoms. So find books by, doctors, people with actual medical licenses, people that have done research, use the skills that you learned in high school and college to find people that are actually, attributed to their work. And don't take my word for it. Don't take other YouTubers' words for it. Really try to find a doctor that knows their field and read their research their books. There's a lot of great physicians and psychologists out there who have written books that the layman can read, like myself, and understand. The Body Keeps Score is one such book that I think is an amazing book for trauma. And I think there's a sense of acceptance and, in a way, belonging that you can get from these materials. Because when you get a diagnosis and you go, okay, let me research this disorder that I have, and you start to realize, oh, other people are experiencing these symptoms. There's a science behind how my brain works, and they're like, I'm not alone. This is a common reaction to this kind of trauma and impact in my life. There's definitely a sense of, I feel like, peace that comes with understanding, because when I have chronic PTSD, and when I research, okay, here's what people that have this experience, I go, okay, here's how they're treating it. Here's how doctors have acknowledged it. And it helps me to go, okay, there's hope for me to be able to treat this and do what others that came before me have done. And that's kind of a big part of what inspired this channel and this podcast, is because I am 34 years old. I experienced child abuse for over 15 years. I have chronic PTSD due to long-term trauma in my developmental years. And I have spent, I think it's my life's work kind of overcoming that and trying to biohack my brain. And I've spent so much time researching this topic and going to therapy and being on medication and trying to really understand myself. And I'm finally getting to a place where I've had a very impactful death in my family and various traumas, and I've learned to survive, and not only survive but thrive. And that's kind of my goal, is I really want others to be able to experience that peace of mind and that sense of worth and belonging and self, hopefully faster and with greater understanding than I ever achieved, because I'm 34 and it took me a very long time to come to those terms. And when you research your symptoms and you start to understand and unlock the doors and push back the shadows and understand, okay, this isn't new to the science and doctor world. I can figure this out. It's such a great feeling, and it's very empowering to feel like, okay, this is not just a random pie in the sky emotion. This is my brain connecting to my body, and this is why my body feels this way. And okay, I can figure this out. I can get through this. I can medically understand it. So far we're at, realize you're not alone, get a diagnosis, and then once you get your diagnosis, do research on your particular mental health challenges, and then figure out a game plan, and that's going to lead you to a sense of acceptance. It's going to help you push through and get through other stages a little faster and hopefully healthier. And the next thing I'm going to recommend, which you probably saw this coming from a mile away, probably just been like, when are you going to get there? I highly recommend therapy and considering medication. I did therapy when I was younger, when I was coming out of my abusive home. It was immensely helpful to me. And then I probably didn't bother with it again until I was in my mid-20s, and I thought, that time of my life is over. I'm not even impacted by my abuse anymore, which was a naive thought. And I was just like, I don't need it. I'm good. Until I had such a major depressive episode. I was like, okay, what could the harm be in getting in therapy again? So I got into therapy again, and I was able to function again. Went a few more years. My father passed away. That was very difficult for me. Went to grief counseling, wasn't really connecting with the therapist very much, gave up on that pretty quick. And then finally, in pandemic times, in quarantine, self-isolation times, I was like, you know what, I got to do something, because my PTSD was getting so bad. I would just lay on my bed like I was clutching a life raft spinning out in the ocean, and I just couldn't get my heart rate to calm down. I was miserable, and I physically couldn't. I thought, like, I've given myself adrenal fatigue. I'm never going to be able to I wouldn't leave the house without my anti-anxiety medication, but I wouldn't take an SSRI because I just thought, like, no, I'm not going to do it. And I don't, and finally I was like, you know what? I have no quality of life. And if anything can help me, I'm going to take that path. So I went into counseling. I got recommended the Body Keeps Score, which kind of indicated that, people with anti-anxiety medicine, benzos, they kind of continue to relapse into the same symptoms, where on an SSRI they have much better results. So I finally found an SSRI that worked for me. With my therapist's help, I learned to kind of negotiate with my doctor, like, hey, I want to be on a small dose because I'm not the kind of person that really enjoys being on a daily medication. Found something that worked for me, and it's really given me my life back. And I definitely qualify that under acceptance because I needed to get to that point that it hurt so much that it was like, okay, fine, I'll do it. And my hope for you listening to this, or the loved ones that you're trying to help by understanding trauma, is that you won't need to get to the point that I got, where I couldn't live my life, where I had no quality of life, before I was willing to look for therapy and to consider an SSRI and a medication. And I'm so grateful for the life it's given me back to use those two things hand in hand. If you're interested in that, I know that getting therapy isn't always easy for everyone, and so the next podcast I'll be doing is going to be all about finding a therapist. And I think there's a lot more to it than people think. They just think, I need a therapist, go find a therapist, boom. And then sometimes they end up unhappy with the therapy that they receive, or they feel uncomfortable. And so that's going to be the next episode, is that we're going to talk more specifically about that point, which is how to get therapy and how to get good therapy and how to get results with your therapy. Like I said, I am not a doctor, and that is why I do recommend therapists, doctors. If you have insurance, if you can afford it, surround yourself with a team of people to really help you and get you to where you need to be. But we are going to talk more about that in the cost restrictive process of therapy, and I'm going to give you some hints and tips for how to be able to afford that. I am very lucky with the therapist that I received because I didn't have insurance at the time. I still don't believe I have insurance that allows for that. And so I'm not sponsored, using these programs that I found, I was able to get therapy when I desperately needed it. So I'm going to also recommend that and give you some tips for that in the next episode. And the final thing I want to tell you is that it is okay to not be okay. I know that is a cliche that you are probably tired of hearing, and you maybe believe on some level for other people, but not for yourself. And I want you to understand, please, if you take nothing else from this podcast, understand it is okay to not be okay. It is okay to accidentally break your leg. Nobody's going to look at you and be like, wow, idiot. Maybe if you're doing some stunts, like, I'm not going to repeat the word, but that infamous MTV show, yeah, somebody might, give you an eye roll. But most of the time, if somebody gets into an accident or they hurt themselves, what do? We treat them with compassion. We bring them food. We want to make sure they're okay. It's okay to not be okay. If you're finding that you're systemically, chronically never okay, I think that that's a big, your body trying to tell you something. If you had a cold, that'd be a symptom. A cold, if you're coughing and you've got a fever, you'd have a symptom, and you'd treat that symptom. Listen to your body, listen to yourself, and understand that it's okay to not be okay, but there is a time to get treatment and to figure things out. For so long, I was in denial that I was still suffering from the impacts of trauma. That's why I think it's so important to understand your symptoms, because it's okay to not get over trauma instantaneously. It's okay for it to take years. It's okay to never fully recover from it. If somebody chops off your hand, that hand doesn't grow back. You have to then learn to live without a hand. And that is probably one of the hardest parts about what I do. And I speak as somebody with chronic PTSD who's a trauma survivor. I feel like I'm kind of, in a way, like the bearer of bad news. I will never have a childhood where I didn't experience 15 years of severe child abuse. I'm never going to wake up and be that adult that had a loving, wonderful, happy childhood and got to learn how to have a healthy attachment to people instead of an anxious attachment to people. I'm learning how to be better now, but I had to come to terms with understanding that I wasn't okay, and that I was going to need lots of therapy, and I was going to need to find a way to become somebody who is functional and healthy. And that's okay. That's okay. It's not my fault that I was, subjected to that as a child. So that is my final message for this episode that I wanted to leave you with, that, it's okay to not be okay. So just to recap, Realize you're not alone. Realize everyone experiences trauma. That's not a failure. Try to get a diagnosis. We're going to talk more about getting therapy and how to access that, even though it's cost restrictive, in our next episode. Consider medication, consider therapy. And once you've gotten a diagnosis, do your research on symptoms of the people that have come before you. Read books, learn that you're not alone, learn that this is a science, just like, a medical science on illness or anything else, and find empowerment in that, and learn how to live your life with those challenges and those potential restrictions, but understand that it can be done. And there's a lot of rewards, I feel like, for people that do experience trauma. I fully believe they make excellent, wonderful leaders. I don't look at them as somebody disabled or less than. I think they can be such impactful, wonderful people once we learn how to understand that we're different and how to kind of thrive with what we've been dealt. And that goes along with our final point, which was understanding it's okay to not feel okay. That's just a symptom, and I would encourage not to ignore it and to find a way to feel more okay often than not. That's the objective, right? So this has been Rue, aka Runic Rigel, from Runic Rigel's Lifestyle channel, also known as Bebop. And I hope that you found that this episode was informative. I would love to hear from you in the comments and have a dialogue with you. I want to know how trauma has impacted your life. I want you to tell me how I can continue to keep this discussion going. Are you looking for acceptance? Have you obtained that? Are you trying to help someone else? Is this for you? I do think this is a very personal process, and I think that acceptance is something that only an individual can experience for themselves. It can't really be forced. We can only support. So I would love to know what it is you're looking for on this channel. I would love to continue this discussion with you. Going forward, I'm really excited about this podcast and this discussion. Thanks so much for being here. I appreciate you, and I hope I'll see you again. Until then, go out there and make life beautiful, and I'll see you all again very soon.